It's a funny thing standing at the funeral of a man who made you feel less like a son-in-law and more like a hired handyman, watching his daughter, your wife, deliver a eulogy that could have won an Oscar. Glenn Darby was laid out in a mahogany casket, his face peaceful in a way it rarely was in life, as if the burden of wealth had finally lifted. I stood off to the side, away from the family section where Karina had barricaded my seat with her designer handbag, marking my place in her heart just as clearly as if she'd planted a flag. As Karina spoke of her father's virtues, meticulously avoiding my name despite my years spent installing handrails, repairing porch steps, and enduring his endless war stories over soup, I caught sight of something peeking from her clutch. My name boldly typed on official letterhead. Her expression, when it finally met mine across the room, wasn't grief but calculation. The polished mask she wore in public, the smile as hollow as our marriage had become. 2 days after the funeral, Karina laid divorce papers on our marble kitchen table, the table we chose together in happier times, and said plainly, "I'm choosing myself." It would have been admirable, this declaration of independence, if it weren't so meticulously timed with her father's passing and the impending fortune. When Glenn Darby's estate was finally disclosed, the whispers around town weren't subtle. $250 million does funny things to people. It sharpens their edges, reveals their true nature. Karina received the call first, believing, of course, she'd be the sole heir to her father's vast empire. But Glenn had one final lesson left for us all, especially his calculating daughter. Sitting in the minor league conference room of Hartwell and Associates, sipping cheap coffee while expensive lawyers shuffled papers, I listened as Karina was bequeathed a mere $1 million, a fraction of what she'd anticipated. Then came the words I never expected. The rest, every dollar, every business interest, every property, left to me, the son-in-law relegated to the shadows. Karina's shock was palpable. Her carefully constructed composure shattered. She accused me of manipulation, of deceiving her father, painting me as an opportunist. Funny, I thought, considering she was the master strategist. Her desperation was almost satisfying. The scales finally tipped after years of imbalance. But Glenn's final gift wasn't merely wealth. It was a path to freedom. A condition in his will cleverly preventing Karina from clawing her way back into my life, at least not without significant cost. His letter made it clear. He saw her clearly, her manipulations and cold ambition, and he wanted better for me. "Don't let her leash you again," Glenn had written, knowing his daughter would never relinquish control willingly. As I stood in the aftermath of his passing, facing threats, accusations, and hidden truths coming to light, I realized that Glenn Darby's greatest legacy wasn't his fortune. It was the chance he'd given me to reclaim my life. Karina didn't waste time after the shock of her father's will wore off. She fought back, first subtly, visiting my workplace, laying emotional traps, reminding me of our happier days. She even brought our wedding photo, the two of us dancing under string lights, promising we could return to that blissful innocence. It almost felt genuine until I remembered the folder hidden in Glenn's pantry, behind cereal boxes, filled with evidence of her attempts to alter his will, emails she desperately tried to erase, and his handwritten suspicions that she'd been slowly poisoning him. "It's never too late for us," she pleaded, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. But her eyes, always calculating, betrayed her desperation. Not for love, but for control of her father's fortune. Glenn's instincts had been right. He knew his daughter too well. I didn't confront her with my discovery, choosing instead to let her own paranoia unravel her carefully woven web of lies. The game escalated when an anonymous letter arrived at my doorstep, cryptic and chilling. "There are things you don't know. Be careful who you trust with Glenn's secrets." The implication was clear. Someone else knew about Karina's games. Someone potentially more dangerous. Curiosity and caution led me back to Glenn's house, my house now according to the will, where I found his study ransacked. Files were missing, the computer taken, but whoever had searched had missed a vital clue. The blue folder behind the pantry boxes. Within were records of Karina's dubious transactions, pharmacy receipts, and even notes Glenn had written about his mysterious bouts of illness. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. Karina wasn't just a cold strategist. She was capable of anything. When I received a midnight call from her, she didn't waste breath on pleasantries. "You weren't supposed to find that folder," she hissed, her voice low and controlled. It was then I knew she had eyes on me, watching my every move. Her next words sent chills down my spine. "Be careful, Wendell. Accidents happen even to wealthy men." Determined not to be her next victim, I sought legal advice, hiring Sarah Chun, a former prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime. We compiled evidence, tracing Karina's steps, each piece of the puzzle falling into place. Still, doubts lingered. Who else was involved, and how deep did this conspiracy run? As I pieced together the fragments of deceit and betrayal, I began to understand Glenn's final act wasn't merely a gift. It was a call to arms. He hadn't just provided wealth or freedom. He'd offered me the chance to stand my ground, confront the monsters hidden behind Karina's polished exterior, and finally claim my life back on my terms. Karina's threats didn't stop with a midnight call. They escalated. Strange cars parked across the street, unmarked envelopes left on my doorstep, each message more ominous than the last. Sarah Chun urged caution, advising me to document everything meticulously. "We're building a case," she reminded me firmly. "Every detail counts." The more we uncovered, the more surreal it felt. Surveillance footage from Glenn's property showed Karina's late-night visits, masked figures accompanying her, clearly searching for something they hadn't yet found. Sarah and I pieced together timelines, noticing patterns in Karina's movements, phone calls to disposable numbers, and financial transactions she thought untraceable. Then, the real breakthrough came. A former associate of Glenn's named Rochelle Vale contacted us, hesitant yet determined. Rochelle had evidence of Karina's previous attempts to manipulate business decisions, even implicating her in suspicious activities tied to another partner's sudden illness. "Karina always had an ambitious streak," Rochelle explained, her voice heavy with regret. "But after Glenn fell ill, her ambition turned ruthless." With Rochelle's testimony secured, Sarah began preparing legal action. But Karina, ever resourceful, struck first. She filed a counterclaim, accusing me of manipulating her father's will and of being involved in his mysterious health declines. The accusations were absurd, yet the spectacle she created was captivating. News outlets ate it up, painting me as the opportunistic son-in-law preying on family tragedy. My reputation crumbled overnight. Colleagues distanced themselves, friends became wary, and whispers followed me everywhere. But even as public opinion swung in her favor, I held on to Glenn's message of resilience. This wasn't just a fight for money or even justice. It was about reclaiming my dignity and proving to myself, once and for all, that I was more than the convenient accessory Karina had always treated me as. Then, in a stunning twist of fate, an unexpected ally emerged from within Karina's inner circle. A cryptic note arrived, handwritten and urgent. "Meet me tonight, alone. The truth you need awaits." Cautious but determined, I prepared myself to face whoever awaited me, ready for whatever revelation was about to come, knowing this could finally be the moment I turned the tide. I met my informant in the shadowy corner of an all-night diner, the kind of place where secrets came with a side of burnt coffee and anonymous booths. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with the look of someone who'd been dragged into a storm she didn't start. She introduced herself only as Marla, and what she had to say changed everything. Marla was Karina's former assistant, the one who'd handled travel bookings, managed appointments, and, apparently, witnessed things no one else had. She handed me a flash drive, hands shaking slightly. "Your wife." She was planning something bigger than an inheritance grab. She had investors lined up, people who wanted Glenn out of the picture so she could liquidate and cash out. If he died, she walked away with it all, until he changed the will. I stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. Sarah later confirmed what I feared. Detailed spreadsheets showing potential profits from dismantling Glenn's empire, communication logs with anonymous buyers, and one chilling document labeled, simply, contingency. The file was a timetable, a schedule, down to the day of Glenn's death. All the pieces clicked into place like a sinister jigsaw puzzle. Glenn hadn't just suspected Karina of plotting against him. He knew, and he'd built the perfect posthumous defense, leaving me not just his wealth, but the armor to survive her retaliation. Still, Marla's final warning echoed louder than any evidence. She's not finished. She's too far in to walk away now, and if she thinks you're about to ruin her plans, you'll be next. I left the diner that night with a flash drive in my pocket, a storm in my chest, and the kind of clarity that only comes when you realize survival might depend on being the last one standing. The next morning, Sarah and I filed an injunction to freeze Glenn's business accounts and property sales pending an investigation. It was a calculated move, a way to buy time while we built the case from every angle. That evening, as I stepped into what used to be my marital home to collect the last of my things, I found Karina waiting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and a look that could shatter steel. "You're making a mess," she said simply, swirling the wine. "And messy men don't win wars." I didn't respond. Words weren't going to cut through whatever fantasy she was clinging to. I just walked past her and opened the drawer where I'd left a copy of Glenn's letter. It was gone. "Looking for something?" she asked, voice velvet slick. "You won't find a way out of this," I said, turning to face her. "There's too much truth piling up around you." "Truth is just a better packaged lie," she said with a smile, sipping her wine. "And I've always been good at packaging." There it was, no remorse, no fear, just pride in the chaos she created. But what she didn't know was how much more I had. Witnesses, timelines, the flash drive, and Marla, who was ready to testify under oath. Karina leaned in close as I grabbed the last of my things. "You think you've got this wrapped up, but you're wrong. I'll rebuild. I always do." "Maybe," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze, "but not from the inside of a courtroom." And with that, I walked out, the door closing behind me on a chapter that had taken everything I thought I knew about love, family, and betrayal, and replaced it with steel in my spine and fire in my chest. I didn't just survive Karina Darby. I outlasted her. A year and a half later, I sat quietly at the back of a county courthouse as Karina's voice cracked under oath. The courtroom wasn't large, but the tension inside it made the air feel like glass ready to shatter. Sarah sat beside me, her expression unreadable, but her fingers subtly drumming the rhythm of confidence against her notepad. Karina had come prepared, dressed in grief and tailored black, with a statement full of victimhood and manufactured betrayal. But truth doesn't sweat under cross-examination, it sharpens. And one by one, her narratives frayed. Rochelle's testimony sealed it. The jury watched the flash drive footage, saw the planning, the profit projections, and the timetable that aligned far too neatly with Glenn's demise. When the verdict came, it didn't roar, it whispered, guilty of will tampering, fraud, and attempted coercion. There was no charge of murder, but the shadow of the accusation hung over her like a sentence all its own. The judge ordered restitution, and with it, the final disintegration of her plans. She didn't even look my way as they led her from the courtroom. I walked outside into a crisp spring morning, breathing air that finally felt like mine. The reporters buzzed around, hungry for quotes, but I said nothing. What was there to say that Glenn's will hadn't said already? I wasn't just free, I was finally, fully alive. Glenn's companies were restructured, the trust he left me supporting small-town businesses and rescue shelters across the state, exactly how he wanted. Sarah and I stayed in touch professionally, though I owed her more than just legal counsel. I owed her the scaffolding that kept me upright while my world collapsed. And Karina? I never saw her again. She served her sentence, moved out of state, and, according to whispers, changed her name. But I'd already changed mine. Not literally, but emotionally. I wasn't Wendell the pushover anymore. I was the man who took the worst betrayal life could deal and turned it into purpose. Sometimes, late at night, I still see Glenn's smirk in my mind's eye. Not the business tycoon expression he wore to board meetings, but the one he had when he beat me at cards and accused me of being too honest for my own good. Not anymore, I say aloud into the silence. And it's true. The man I became through Karina's betrayal is one I can finally live with. The only thing I regret is not seeing it all sooner. But then again, maybe you have to be shattered before you can be forged.